I saw them, the HOA. 3 of them, clad in their khaki uniforms and looking like they're on a mission from beige hell, probably. And they're carrying a chainsaw. A chainsaw. They're walking towards my tree, my magnificent, glorious oak tree, and they're looking at it like it's some kind of enemy, like it's a rogue dandelion that needs to be eradicated. I freeze. I can't believe what I'm seeing. This can't be happening. They wouldn't, would they? They stop at the base of the tree, rev the chainsaw, and that's when the red mist descends. I'm not usually a violent person. I'm more of a passive-aggressive, witty retort kind of guy. But seeing those HOA goons with their chainsaw and their smug expressions about to butcher my tree, something inside me just snapped. It was like a switch flipped. Shock turned to disbelief. Disbelief turned to anger, and anger. Well, anger turned into a primal urge to protect my tree. My beautiful, magnificent, irreplaceable oak tree. This tree is a legend. Old, wise, and beautiful, it's been the centerpiece of my front yard for as long as I can remember. It's practically a member of the family. It provides shade in the summer, a riot of color in the fall, and a home for countless squirrels and birds. It's my tree. I leaped off the porch, yelling something unintelligible, probably something along the lines of, "Get away from my tree." I charged at them, a man possessed, ready to defend my leafy friend with my bare hands if necessary. I'm pretty sure I looked like a crazy person, a tree-defending, crazy person. They stopped, startled by my sudden appearance and my enthusiasm. They looked at me, then at the tree, then back at me, their faces a mixture of surprise and... Was that fear? Good. They should be afraid. "What do you think you're doing?" I yelled, my voice shaking with rage. "Get away from my tree! Get away from it now!" They mumbled something about neighborhood aesthetics and unruly vegetation, but I wasn't listening. I was too busy seeing red. All I could think about was protecting my tree. My beautiful, magnificent oak tree. And those HOA goons, they weren't going to touch it. Not on my watch. They weren't going to get away with this. They weren't going to touch my tree. Not on my watch. The red mist was still swirling. My protective instincts were on high alert. And I was ready to unleash the full force of my petty revenge. Clean aesthetic, they'd said. Unruly vegetation. They wanted to chop down my beautiful oak to make it fit their sterile vision of suburban perfection. Fine. They wanted clean aesthetic. I'd give them clean aesthetic. But it wasn't going to be the kind they were expecting. As I stood there, glaring at them, a brilliant, ridiculous, utterly perfect idea sparked in my mind. If they wanted to mess with my tree, I'd give them something to really complain about. Something so over the top, so audacious, so utterly unruly that it would make their heads spin. A treehouse, not just any treehouse, a luxury treehouse, a massive, multi-level canopy castle complete with lights, a balcony, maybe even a spiral staircase. A treehouse so grand, so magnificent, so utterly ridiculous that it would become a local landmark. A giant leafy middle finger to the HOA and their clean aesthetic. It was perfect. Absolutely perfect. It was petty, it was excessive, it was exactly the kind of clean aesthetic the HOA deserved. They wanted to chop down my tree? Fine. I'd turn it into the most talked about, most envied, most unruly structure in Willow Creek Estates. They wanted a clean aesthetic? I'd give them a clean aesthetic. A clean, tree-filled aesthetic. The chainsaw goons were still standing there, looking a little nervous. They probably sensed the shift in my demeanor. The primal rage was subsiding, replaced by something even more dangerous. A plan. A glorious, treehouse-shaped plan. I smiled. It was a slow, deliberate smile that probably sent shivers down their spines. "You know," I said, my voice dangerously calm, "I've been thinking. This tree, it's a bit underutilized, don't you think? I've decided to make some improvements." They exchanged nervous glances. They probably thought I was going to build a birdhouse or something. They had no idea what I had in store for them. They had no idea that their attempt to cut down my tree had just unleashed the beast. the treehouse beast, and it was going to be magnificent. Okay, so Operation Treehouse was a go. I needed an architect, not just any architect. I needed an architect who was willing to embrace the, shall we say, unconventional nature of my project. An architect who wouldn't just build a treehouse, but who would build a luxury treehouse. A treehouse so grand, so magnificent, so utterly ridiculous that it would make the HOA's heads spin. I started my search online, naturally, browsing websites, looking at portfolios, trying to find someone who seemed open-minded, someone who wouldn't just laugh at me when I told them my idea. And then I found her, Sarah. Her website showcased her work, modern, innovative designs with a focus on incorporating natural elements. She even had a few projects that involved treehouses. Smaller ones, sure, but treehouses nonetheless. She seemed like my kind of architect. I called her up, explained my situation, the HOA, the tree, the chainsaw incident, the whole shebang. She listened patiently, her initial surprise gradually turning into intrigue. "A treehouse around the entire tree?" she asked, her voice a mixture of disbelief and excitement. "Exactly," I said. "A big one, a luxury one, with all the bells and whistles." There was a pause. Then she chuckled. "I'm in," she said. That was music to my ears. We met a few days later, at my house, naturally. She stood there, gazing up at my magnificent oak, her eyes wide with appreciation. "This tree is incredible," she said. It's perfect." I told her my vision. A multi-level treehouse with a balcony, maybe a spiral staircase, custom lighting, the works. I wanted it to be like a small house, nestled amongst the branches. A canopy castle. She was enthusiastic. She loved the challenge. She started sketching ideas, incorporating the tree's unique shape and size into the design. She talked about using sustainable materials, about maximizing natural light, about creating a space that felt both luxurious and connected to nature. The design process was amazing. She was brilliant. She understood my vision perfectly. She came up with ideas I hadn't even thought of. We spent hours poring over blueprints, discussing materials, tweaking the design. It was like being a kid again, planning the ultimate treehouse. She incorporated the tree's massive trunk into the treehouse design, making it the central support structure. The branches became part of the architecture, weaving through the rooms, creating a sense of being truly immersed in the tree. It was ingenious. The treehouse was going to be, well, it was going to be epic. A masterpiece of architecture, a testament to my love for my tree, and a giant middle finger to the HOA. It was perfect, absolutely perfect. And Sarah? She was just as excited about it as I was. We were going to build something truly special. Something that would make the HOA's head spin. And something that would make my tree even more magnificent than it already was. Okay, so we had the design. Sarah, my amazing architect, had created a masterpiece. A luxury treehouse so grand, so magnificent, so utterly ridiculous that it would make the HOA's heads spin. But there was one small hurdle to overcome before we could start building. Permits. Ah, permits. The bane of every homeowner's existence. The bureaucratic red tape that can turn even the simplest project into a nightmare. And I knew that the HOA wasn't going to make this easy. They were going to fight me every step of the way. So I prepared. I knew I had to be meticulous. I knew I had to dot every I and cross every T. I knew that any small mistake, any tiny oversight, would give the HOA an opening to shut down my project. I went to the city planning department, armed with Sarah's blueprints, detailed specifications, and a healthy dose of patience. I talked to the permit clerks. I talked to the building inspectors. I talked to anyone who would listen. I explained my project, emphasizing its safety, its sustainability, and its adherence to all building codes. The permit process was an experience. It was a bureaucratic maze filled with forms, fees, and endless waiting. I had to get permits for everything: building permits, electrical permits, plumbing permits, yes, even for a treehouse. You name it. It was like trying to navigate a jungle of red tape. And, as expected, the HOA tried to interfere. They sent letters to the planning department claiming that the treehouse was unsafe, unsightly, and a violation of neighborhood aesthetics. They even tried to argue that it violated some obscure zoning ordinance about excessive canopy coverage. Seriously? They pulled out all the stops. They called in favors, they made complaints, they even tried to attend the permit hearings, armed with their concerned citizen personas and their endless supply of petty grievances. But I was ready for them. I had anticipated their every move. I had all my paperwork in order, every regulation met, every box checked. I had Sarah's architectural plans, stamped and approved by licensed engineers. I had letters from arborists confirming the health and stability of the tree. I even had a scale model of the treehouse, just to demonstrate its, shall we say, harmonious integration with the surrounding environment. I presented my case calmly and methodically, addressing every single one of the HOA's objections with facts, figures, and a healthy dose of sarcasm. I pointed out the absurdity of their claims, the pettiness of their grievances, and the sheer lack of any legitimate grounds for denying my permits. And, much to their dismay, I won. The city planning department, after reviewing all the evidence, approved my permits, every single one. The HOA's attempts to block my project had failed, miserably. It was a victory. A small victory, perhaps, but a victory nonetheless. And it was a crucial victory, because now nothing could stop me. The treehouse was going to be built, and the HOA, they were going to have to watch it happen. Brick by brick, board by board, nail by nail, my luxury treehouse was going to rise, and there was nothing they could do about it. Okay, permits in hand, it was time for the main event: construction. And this wasn't your average backyard treehouse we're talking about. This was a luxury treehouse, a multi-level canopy castle, a testament to my love for my tree and my utter disdain for the HOA's clean aesthetic. The construction was, well, it was an epic undertaking. It was a massive project, involving cranes, scaffolding, and a whole team of skilled carpenters, electricians, and plumbers. It was like building a small house, only in a tree. The scale of the project was mind-boggling. The treehouse was designed to wrap around the massive oak trunk with multiple levels branching out into the canopy. It was huge. It dwarfed the other houses in the neighborhood. It was magnificent. The first step was building the support structure. Massive beams, carefully engineered and secured to the tree trunk, formed the foundation of the treehouse. It was like building a platform in the sky. A very, very large platform. Then came the walls, the floors, the roof. Sustainable materials, chosen for their beauty and durability, were used throughout the construction. The treehouse was designed to blend seamlessly with its surroundings, using natural wood finishes and large windows to maximize natural light. The features of the treehouse were, well, they were luxurious. There were multiple levels, connected by a winding spiral staircase. There was a spacious balcony overlooking the neighborhood, perfect for enjoying a morning coffee or an evening cocktail. There was custom lighting, both inside and out, creating a warm and inviting ambiance. And yes, there was even a small kitchenette and a bathroom. Because why not? If you're going to build a luxury treehouse, you might as well go all out. The construction process was fascinating to watch. Cranes lifted massive beams into the air. Carpenters hammered away at the walls. Electricians wired the intricate lighting system. It was like watching a giant puzzle being put together piece by piece. And the tree? It was the centerpiece of it all. The branches wove through the rooms, creating a sense of being truly immersed in the tree. The leaves provided shade and privacy. The tree was incorporated into the design, not just as a support structure, but as an integral part of the treehouse itself. It took months, but finally it was finished. My luxury treehouse, my canopy castle, my giant, leafy middle finger to the HOA. It was everything I'd dreamed of and more. It was magnificent. It was ridiculous. It was perfect. And the HOA, they were losing their minds. Okay, so the treehouse was rising. Slowly but surely, my canopy castle was taking shape. A magnificent multi-level structure nestled amongst the branches of my oak tree. And the HOA? Well, let's just say they weren't exactly thrilled. Their reactions were predictable. Outrage, disbelief, and a desperate scramble to find some way to stop the project. They were losing their minds. Mrs. McMillan, the HOA president, was leading the charge, naturally. She was apoplectic, incandescent. She was practically foaming at the mouth. I'd see her pacing around my yard, her face a mask of pure, unadulterated fury, muttering to herself about property values and neighborhood aesthetics. She looked like she was about to have a stroke. She sent me letters, of course. Official-looking letters, filled with legal jargon and threats of fines and legal action. She claimed the treehouse was unsafe, unsightly, and a blatant violation of every single rule in the HOA handbook. She even tried to argue that it was a fire hazard. Seriously, a treehouse, a fire hazard? She called the city planning department, trying to get my permits revoked. She called the building inspectors, trying to find some kind of code violation. She even tried to rally the other HOA members, urging them to join her crusade against my treehouse. But it was no use. My permits were in order, my construction was up to code, and my treehouse was perfectly legal. Mostly. There was nothing she could do. And the neighbors? Their reactions were the opposite of the HOA's. Initially, they were shocked, of course. They'd never seen anything like it. A massive treehouse rising up in the middle of the neighborhood? It was unconventional, to say the least. But then the shock turned into amusement, and then the amusement turned into excitement, and then the excitement turned into appreciation. They started to see the beauty of it, the craftsmanship, the ingenuity, the sheer audacity of the project. They started to see it as a symbol of rebellion against the HOA's tyranny, a symbol of creativity and individuality, a symbol of just not taking things too seriously. The treehouse became a local attraction. People would drive by just to get a glimpse of it. Kids would point and whisper in awe. Adults would chuckle and shake their heads, marveling at its sheer size and its presence. It became a source of community pride. My neighbors started to see it as their treehouse, a unique and special feature of their neighborhood. They even started throwing treehouse parties, bringing food and drinks and celebrating the, shall we say, unconventional addition to Willow Creek Estates. And the HOA? They were seething. They were furious. They were losing their minds. And the more they tried to stop it, the more popular the treehouse became. It was like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Their attempts to shut it down only made it more desirable, more talked about, more legendary. Okay, so the treehouse was built, the neighbors were thrilled, and the HOA, they were still fuming. They couldn't stop it, they couldn't tear it down, but they weren't going down without a fight. Their next tactic? The unruly argument. They sent me another letter, naturally. This one was even more ridiculous than usual. It claimed that the treehouse was too unruly and violated the neighborhood's clean aesthetic. Unruly? Seriously? It was a treehouse, a magnificent, custom-built, architect-designed treehouse. It wasn't like it was a giant, inflatable, bouncy castle shaped like a clown, although that would have been pretty awesome. They argued that it was too big, too tall, too treehousey. They claimed it disrupted the harmony of the neighborhood and detracted from the overall aesthetic appeal. They even used the phrase arboreal monstrosity. Seriously? An arboreal monstrosity. It was a treehouse, not a Godzilla-sized tree-eating monster. I chuckled. They really thought they could get away with this? They were grasping at straws, desperate to find some way to justify their hatred of my magnificent treehouse. I responded with a letter of my own, naturally. Polite, but firm. And dripping with sarcasm, naturally. I attached copies of my architectural plans,
stamped and approved by licensed engineers. I included copies of my permits, showing that the treehouse was perfectly legal. I even included photos of the treehouse, highlighting its, shall we say, harmonious integration with the surrounding environment. While I appreciate the HOA's artistic critique of my treehouse, I wrote, I'd like to point out a few things. Firstly, the treehouse is built on my property, with all necessary permits and approvals. Secondly, I'd like to remind the HOA that the term clean aesthetic is subjective and open to interpretation. And thirdly, I added with a wink, I believe the treehouse actually enhances the aesthetic appeal of the neighborhood. It's quite striking, don't you think? I finished the letter with a cheerful, "Have a nice day," and sent it off. The HOA, predictably, didn't respond. They were stumped. They couldn't argue with permits. They couldn't argue with architectural plans. And they certainly couldn't argue with the, shall we say, uniqueness of my treehouse. And then the irony, the delicious karmic irony. The treehouse, which the HOA claimed was going to destroy property values, actually started to increase property values.
Real estate agents started advertising Willow Creek Estates as a treehouse community. They highlighted the unique and desirable nature of the neighborhood, emphasizing the presence of my magnificent treehouse. People were actually moving to the neighborhood because of the treehouse. It was becoming a local landmark, a symbol of community pride, and a major selling point for real estate agents. The HOA, of course, was furious. They were caught in their own trap. Their attempts to destroy my treehouse had backfired spectacularly. It had become so popular, so beloved, so valuable, that they couldn't touch it. They were stuck with it, and they knew it. It was poetic justice at its finest. Okay, so the treehouse was a hit. It was increasing property values, attracting new residents, and generally making the HOA look like a bunch of, well, let's just say unhappy people. They'd tried the unruly argument. They'd tried to claim it was a fire hazard. They'd even tried to argue that it was an arboreal monstrosity. But nothing worked. My permits were in order. My construction was up to code, and the treehouse was undeniably awesome. So, the HOA, realizing their mistake, decided to take a different approach. If they couldn't get rid of my treehouse, they'd just make sure no one else could have one. They decided to change the rules. They called a special meeting, a meeting of the minds, as Mrs. McMillan so dramatically put it. The agenda? Adding a new section to the HOA bylaws, specifically a section that would ban large treehouses. They were going to close the treehouse loophole once and for all. They sent out flyers. They put up signs. They even went door to door, trying to rally support for their anti-treehouse crusade. They painted my treehouse as a dangerous, unsightly, and property value-destroying monstrosity. They were pulling out all the stops. They were confident, of course. They assumed that the residents would be on their side. After all, who would want a neighborhood full of giant treehouses? It would be chaos, an arboreal apocalypse. But they underestimated the power of, well, of a really awesome treehouse. The day of the special meeting arrived, and the clubhouse was packed. Everyone in Willow Creek Estates was there. The Karen contingent, clutching their pearls and muttering about property values, were firmly on the HOA's side. But then there were the others, the ones who had fallen in love with the treehouse, the ones who appreciated its beauty, its uniqueness, and its contribution to the community, the ones who saw it as a symbol of rebellion against the HOA's tyranny. They were the silent majority, the treehouse lovers, and they were about to make their voices heard. Mrs. McMillan, looking like she was about to lead a charge against a flock of feathered fiends, or in this case, a flock of leafy treehouses, took the stage. She gave a passionate speech about the importance of neighborhood aesthetics, the dangers of unauthorized arboreal structures, and the threat that large treehouses posed to the very fabric of Willow Creek Estates. It was all very dramatic. Then it was time to vote. And that's when the magic happened. One by one, the residents cast their ballots, and one by one, the votes went against the rule change.
The Karen contingent was stunned. They couldn't believe it. Their carefully crafted plan to ban treehouses was crumbling before their very eyes. But the treehouse lovers had spoken. They'd seen the light, or rather, the leafy canopy. They'd realized that life is too short to worry about perfectly manicured lawns and clean aesthetics. They'd embraced the treehouse. And so, the HOA was defeated, again. Their attempt to change the rules had backfired spectacularly. They were stuck with the treehouse. And more importantly, they were stuck with the idea of treehouses. The seed had been planted. The treehouse revolution had begun. Okay, so the HOA was trying to pull a fast one, attempting to ban future treehouses after the fact. They'd called their special meeting, confident they had the votes. They were so wrong. So wrong. The residents of Willow Creek Estates had fallen in love with my treehouse. It wasn't just a structure. It was the structure. It was beautiful, unique, and it had become a symbol of not putting up with HOA nonsense. They appreciated the craftsmanship, the sheer audacity of it all, and the fact that it made their neighborhood interesting. It had character, something Willow Creek Estates desperately lacked before, and they weren't about to let the HOA take that away. The vote was a landslide, a resounding no to the proposed rule change. The Karen contingent looked shocked, their faces a mixture of disbelief and outrage. They couldn't believe their perfect plan had backfired so spectacularly. They were so used to getting their way, so accustomed to enforcing their petty rules, that they'd completely misjudged the mood of the neighborhood. But the residents had spoken, loudly and clearly. They loved the treehouse, and they weren't going to let the HOA ruin it for everyone. And that wasn't all. The HOA's overreach, their constant meddling, their obsession with control, it had finally reached a tipping point. The residents were fed up. They were tired of the petty rules, the endless letters, the constant threats. They were tired of being told what they could and couldn't do with their own property. So, along with voting down the treehouse ban, they did something else. Something even more satisfying. They voted the entire HOA board out of office. Mrs. McMillan and her cronies were ousted. Their reign of beige terror was finally over. They were replaced by a new board, a board that actually listened to the residents, a board that understood the importance of not being a bunch of power-hungry busybodies. It was a clean sweep, a complete and utter victory for the treehouse lovers, and for everyone who was just tired of the HOA's nonsense. And the treehouse? It became a permanent fixture of Willow Creek Estates, a symbol of resistance against overbearing HOAs, a testament to the power of creativity and individuality, and a reminder that sometimes the best way to fight conformity is with a really, really awesome treehouse. It became a local landmark, a source of community pride, and a destination for tourists and treehouse enthusiasts from all over. Property values continued to climb. Real estate agents proudly advertised the treehouse community, and Willow Creek Estates became known as the coolest, most unique suburb in the state. And me? Well, I became a local hero. The guy who stood up to the HOA and won. The guy who built the treehouse. The guy who brought a little bit of magic, and a whole lot of leaves, to Willow Creek Estates. And every time I looked out at my magnificent treehouse, nestled amongst the branches of my oak tree, I smiled. It was a small victory, maybe, but it was a victory nonetheless. And it was a victory that proved that even the most powerful HOA can't stand up to the power of a really, really awesome treehouse.